us. Um, well, you talked about our memories of that time. So I was 18-year-old then, and there are some things which stand out. I mean, there is a commonality in what we all will say, but there are some things which are very specific to each one of us. So I will discuss what was specific about that night to me in particular. And of course, the general theme here is of terror and feeling vulnerable and traumatized. And 31 years later, the story is still the same. So 1990, January 19 was a very traumatic night for us. And we were all in different stages of our life. I was 18, somebody was a teenager, somebody was very young. Uh, but the trauma was the same for all of us. So if I tell you my own memory of that particular night, I'll start off with that. It was a normal night. I was 18. I still remember I was watching a movie on TV, and my parents were sleeping. It was just the three of us in the house, and suddenly you imagine an 18-year-old just watching TV, and outside there was this blaring of the loudspeakers from the local religious places. And I couldn't make the head and tail of what's going on. And then I looked out of the window and I saw our house was slightly away from the main road. But when I looked at the main road, we saw all these crowds of people. They were chanting slogans, and some of them were holding, what we call as mashals in India, and torches and lanterns. And I was thinking, what is going on? What is happening? I couldn't make out at that point what they were saying. So I woke my parents up and I said, something is happening. Just wake up. So we all looked out of the window, and then by that time we were able to make some head and tail of what the slogans were. And like your colleague said earlier, it was things like relive, saliv the gale, which means convert, die, or or just join us. So things like that, and things like Indian dogs go back. There were a lot of very anti-Indian slogans at that time, and things like we want Kashmir with the Pandit women and but without the Pandit men. So I remember being totally shocked because I had never heard these slogans before, and then to see a mass of hundreds of people actually on the main road saying all these, you can imagine what it does to an 18-year-old girl. So, and then the phones started ringing, the landline, and people were saying this is happening across the whole town, across whole of Srinagar and across the whole Kashmir. So the same scenario was being replicated, if in all the main streets of Srinagar, and that just totally panicked us. And I remember my parents, my aunt, she lived next door, so my parents said, "Let's lock the house and just let's go to her, and at least we'll be 5 or 6 of us together." So we went to her house, and the thing I really want to say here is, which I vividly remember, we were sitting on her balcony. We were all very traumatized, all men, children, old people. And then one of my cousin's wife, she was crying, and I asked her, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Do you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of 1947, when the Kabalis raid." So we had, in 1947, we had events when Kabalis from across the border raided Kashmir. They couldn't reach Srinagar because they were stopped by the Indian army on the way. But she started crying, saying this is how it started then, because her family had been killed at that time, her grandparents, I think. And she said, this is how it starts. So you have these mobs, and then suddenly they will enter the homes and people will be killed, and the whole town will be totally wiped out. And that, I remember that just totally freaked me out. And then obviously everyone was panicking and crying. And I could hear my parents, they were talking about things like poison and what will we do with the girls. So I could hear some things being talked about. And I was thinking, okay, what is the plan now? There is no plan. So if this mob suddenly comes into the inner roads and attacks us, we have no defense, we have no weapons. If you know, people have talked about us being we're a very literate community. Our focus has mostly been on books, so we don't have any weapons, apart
Yeah,
from
it
kitchen
is.
knives. So
It is indeed
so
very shocking. And I want to